In 1945, a British archaeologist named Henry Rawlinson II was cataloging a basement storage room at the British Museum. The room had been sealed since the war. The crates inside had never been fully processed, and on a shelf in the back, wrapped in cloth and mislabeled as a duplicate fragment from the Ur-3 period, was a tablet. A small tablet, roughly the size of a man's hand, covered in cuneiform script so fine and so dense that Rawlinson reportedly held it to the light for several minutes before setting it down and walking out of the room without logging it. He came back the next day with a colleague. The colleague was a linguist. The linguist began translating. 3 weeks later, the tablet was reclassified. The file was sealed. The linguist was transferred to a different department and never published another paper on Sumerian religious texts for the rest of his career. The tablet sat in that basement for 11 more years. When it was finally re-examined in 1956, the scholar assigned to it, a German academic named Werner Hölscher, produced a partial translation that circulated privately among a small number of universities. It was never formally published. Hölscher gave one lecture on it at the University of Heidelberg and then went silent. His lecture notes were not included in his estate when he died in 1971. The partial translation exists today in 3 known copies, held privately, none of them publicly available. What was on that tablet is the subject of this video. Not because it describes a battle, not because it lists a king's lineage, but because it describes, in specific and clinical language, exactly what was placed inside the human mind before a person is born. What was encoded in the structure of a human being? What you were given before you arrived here. And according to this tablet, it was not random. If you have ever watched a video on the Lost Codex and thought, "Why does nobody talk about this?" This is the one you stay for. And if you are not subscribed yet, do it now. Because what comes next is the reason this channel exists. To understand why this tablet matters, you need to understand who left it behind. The Sumerians were not a primitive culture. They were the first civilization on record to develop writing, codified law, formal astronomy, urban planning, and a structured medical system. All of it emerging in southern Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq, around 3500 BCE, before the Greeks, before Egypt's New Kingdom, before any civilization that Western history typically names as foundational. The Sumerians were already thousands of years into a sophisticated intellectual tradition by the time other cultures were still scratching symbols into cave walls. They mapped constellations and tracked planetary cycles with an accuracy that baffles modern astronomers who have to account for the fact that the Sumerians did this without telescopes. They calculated the length of a year to within a few minutes of our current measurements. They described the distance between Earth and what they called the outer planets in a numerical system so precise that researchers in the 1980s found it matched modern heliocentric calculations within a margin of error smaller than 2%. And they wrote everything down, on clay, in enormous quantities. There are over 500,000 cuneiform tablets in existence. Most have never been fully translated. Of those that have been translated, the majority sit in university archives where they are accessible only to a small circle of specialists. The public does not read what is on those tablets. In most cases, the public does not even know the tablets exist. The tablet that Henry Rawlinson II found in that basement was not a theological text in the conventional sense. It was not a prayer. It was not a hymn to a god. According to the partial translation produced by Hölscher, it was a record, a technical record, written in the voice of a scribe who was himself recording what he described as older knowledge. Knowledge passed down from what the text calls the ones who shaped the vessel. That phrase, the ones who shaped the vessel, appears 7 times in the tablet. It is, according to the translation, a reference not to a god in the religious sense, but to an intelligence, a working intelligence that performed a specific task on the human form before that form entered the world. But none of that prepared the researchers for what this particular tablet actually said. The first thing the tablet describes is the nature of the barrier placed between the conscious mind and what it calls the deep record. The Sumerians had a word, and this is crucial, a specific technical word that does not translate cleanly into any modern language, but which Hulscher rendered as the sealed layer. This sealed layer, according to the tablet, was not a natural feature of the human mind. It was installed. The scribe uses the same verb, the same cuneiform verb, that appears in Sumerian administrative texts when describing the sealing of a warehouse or the closing of a city gate. It is a deliberate closure, a constructed barrier, and the tablet states, without ambiguity, that this barrier was placed between what you experience as waking thought and what it calls the inherited knowing, the full record of what you are and where your awareness originated. Think about that for a moment. The oldest written civilization in the world produced a tablet that describes the human mind not as a natural organ of awareness, but as a structured system with a deliberately installed partition. And the word they used for that partition is the same word they used for sealing a city gate. Not a spiritual metaphor, a technical description. The modern neuroscience parallel is almost too precise to dismiss. Researchers studying what is known as the default mode network, the part of the brain that activates when you are not focused on external tasks, have found that this network appears to suppress access to certain kinds of deep associative memory under ordinary conscious conditions. The suppression is not incidental. It is active. It is maintained. When it is disrupted through meditation, through certain neurological events, through specific pharmacological interventions, people report experiences that they consistently describe using the same language across cultures. The feeling of remembering something they did not know they had forgotten. The tablet calls this the moment the gate opens without permission, and the scribe notes that this moment was considered dangerous by the ones who shaped the vessel. Now, here is where it gets uncomfortable. And I want you to stay with me, because what comes next is the part that Hulscher reportedly found most difficult to put into writing. The second sequence in the tablet describes what was placed inside the sealed layer. Not behind it. Inside it. The scribe uses the language of storage, the same language used in Sumerian commercial records for goods placed in a sealed container for transport. The barrier itself, according to the tablet, is not empty. It contains what the scribe calls the original instructions. And these instructions, the tablet states, govern three things: the direction of a person's deepest longing, the nature of the fear that the person will never fully escape, and the specific capacity that person carried into this life that was meant to be used, but that the sealed layer prevents them from accessing without effort. Read that again, slowly. Because this tablet, carved in clay by a scribe in ancient Mesopotamia, is describing something that modern psychology arrived at only in the last 100 years. Carl Jung called it the shadow. Modern trauma researchers call it the implicit memory system. Attachment theorists call it the internal working model. But the Sumerians did not call it any of those things. They called it the contents of the gate, and they said it was put there before you arrived. What I am about to tell you next is the reason 3 scholars who worked on partial translations of this tablet stopped giving public interviews. The third element the tablet describes is what the scribe calls the name that was not spoken aloud. This is one of the most discussed passages in the known copies of the translation, because the language here shifts. For most of the tablet, the scribe writes in the third person, describing the human form as a subject, an object of the process being recorded. But at this point in the text, the scribe shifts to the second person. The tablet begins addressing the reader directly. It says, and I am using Hulscher's translation here, it says, The name given to you before the gate was sealed is not the name you answer to now. The name you answer to is a designation for the vessel. The original name describes the function. In Sumerian culture, names were not sentimental. They were operational. A name in the ancient Near East described what something did or what it was meant to accomplish. The name of a tool describes its function. The name of a field described its yield. The name of a child, in the most serious religious contexts, described the child's purpose in the cosmic order. When this tablet says that every human being was given an original name before birth, a name that describes the function, not the vessel, it is making a specific claim. It is saying that you have a purpose that was encoded before your conscious mind was assembled, and that the sealed layer was placed precisely over the part of you that knows what that purpose is. This is not philosophy. According to this tablet, it is engineering. Stop. Before we move forward, there is something about this tablet that researchers will not put in writing. It is one thing to say that the Sumerians had sophisticated ideas about the human mind. That is academically acceptable. But what this tablet claims is not just sophisticated, it is operational. It claims to be a record of a procedure that was performed on every human being before birth. And the question that Hulsher apparently could not resolve, the question that his lecture notes reportedly circled again and again, was this: if this is a record of something that was done, then who was doing it? And why was it done in a way that made it so difficult to remember? The fourth element the tablet addresses is the mechanism of forgetting itself. And this is the passage that, once you hear it, you will not be able to stop thinking about. The scribe writes that forgetting was not a flaw. It was the first feature. The ones who shaped the vessel did not accidentally leave the original instructions inaccessible. They made them inaccessible. The tablet uses a word that Hulsher translated as crafted forgetting, a compound Sumerian term that appears nowhere else in the translated corpus. Crafted forgetting, designed amnesia. The scribe records that this was done because a vessel that remembered everything it was before arriving would not engage with the world it arrived in. It would move through the physical experience of life at a distance, like someone watching a performance they have already memorized. The forgetting, according to the tablet, was the mechanism that made full presence possible. This is not a condemnation. The scribe does not treat this as a cruelty. He treats it as a necessity. He records it with the same neutral precision that a Sumerian engineer might use to record why a canal was built at a particular depth. It was done because the design required it. But then, the scribe adds something that gives even the neutral tone a strange weight. He adds that the forgetting was never meant to be permanent, and that the original instructions were designed to surface at a specific point in the life of the vessel. Not randomly, not accidentally, but in response to a particular kind of pressure. A pressure the tablet describes in terms that translate uncomfortably precisely as the moment when the life you built no longer contains the life you were meant to live. We are now past the midpoint of this tablet, and I want to pause and ask you something, because I think you already know what I am about to describe. I think you have felt it. That sensation, not depression, not crisis, but something quieter and more persistent. The feeling that something in you knows something that you do not yet have the language for. The tablet has a name for that sensation. It is described in the fifth sequence, and the scribe calls it the pressure of the sealed layer. The instructions are pushing against the barrier from the inside. Not because anything is wrong, because something is trying to open. The fifth element of the tablet is the one that surprised researchers the most, because it is the most specific. The scribe does not speak in generalities here. He lists what he calls the 7 pressures, 7 distinct inner experiences that indicate the sealed layer is being activated from within. And when you hear what they are, you will recognize them, not because you have studied Sumerian history, because you have lived them. The first pressure is described as the recurring sense that you were meant to do something that you have not yet done. The second is a specific category of grief. Grief not for a person or a loss, but for something abstract, something you cannot name, something that feels like a memory of a place you have never been. The third pressure is what the scribe calls the wrong fit sensation. The persistent feeling that the life you are living is slightly misaligned with something inside you, the way a door sits in a frame that is not quite square. The fourth is an unusual relationship with time. The sense that certain periods of your life felt more real than others, and that the less real periods are somehow the ones that were expected of you. The fifth pressure is what the scribe calls the dreaming that teaches. Dreams that feel less like dreams and more like transmissions. Dreams that leave you with information you did not have before you slept. The sixth is the capacity for recognition. Meeting a person, reading a passage, hearing a piece of music, and experiencing not the newness of discovery, but the familiarity of remembering. And the seventh pressure is the one the scribe marks with an additional symbol. The symbol that appears in Sumerian texts to indicate importance. And the seventh pressure is simply this: the knowledge, without evidence that you are here for something specific. Not grandiose, not famous, specific, yours, and that you have not yet fully arrived at it. 7 pressures, described on a clay tablet in ancient Mesopotamia. And every single one of them is something that human beings in the 21st century describe in therapists' offices, in journals, in late-night conversations with people they trust. The Sumerians were not guessing. According to this tablet, they were reading from the original documentation. What I am about to tell you now is the part of this translation that Hölscher flagged in his notes as, and this is his word, premature, meaning he felt the world was not yet ready to receive it without misunderstanding it. I think he was wrong about that, because the sixth element of the tablet is not a threat. It is an explanation, and it is the explanation that changes everything that came before. The scribe records what he calls the intended convergence. This is the passage that describes what was meant to happen, what the design was moving toward. And the convergence is this: there was a point built into the structure of each vessel at which the sealed layer was designed to become permeable. Not to break, not to dissolve, but to become permeable, to allow the original instructions to begin moving from the inside out, gradually, in the way that water moves through stone. The scribe says this convergence was not tied to a specific age. It was tied to a specific condition. The condition is described as the moment when seeking replaces performing, when the life you were building for others, the life of meeting expectations, fulfilling roles, becoming what was needed of you, gives way to a different kind of searching. The search has no clear social purpose. The searching that makes practical people in your life uncomfortable because they cannot see what you are looking for. The tablet says, this is not a crisis. It is the gate beginning to open on schedule. You are not watching ancient history right now. You are watching the document that explains why you feel what you feel. Because that convergence, the sealed layer becoming permeable, the original instructions beginning to surface. The Sumerians were describing what we now call the second half of life. The developmental shift that Jungian analysts have written about. The phenomenon that neuroscientists studying aging have identified in patterns of increased right hemisphere activity in people past middle age. The tablet did not call it aging. It is called the return of the original name, the moment when the vessel begins to remember not what it was built to carry, but what it was built to find. The seventh element of the tablet is the one that takes the longest to sit with, because the first six describe the design. The seventh describes what was left outside the design, what was not installed, what was deliberately withheld. The scribe records that the ones who shaped the vessel made a specific choice not to include the conclusion, not to encode the destination. Every human being was given the pressures, the original name, the inherited knowing, the sealed layer, the mechanism for the gate to open. But the final answer was not included in the package. And the scribe records the reason. The reason is given in language that is almost unbearably plain. It says, the conclusion cannot be installed because the conclusion is created, not contained. The purpose of the design is not to carry you to a predetermined end. The purpose of the design is to produce the conditions under which you create the end yourself. The original instructions are not a map, they are a capacity. The destination does not exist until the vessel arrives at it and builds it from what was sealed inside. This is the passage that reportedly stopped Hulsher cold, because it is not mystical. It is not religious in the conventional sense. It is a description of a system, a deliberately incomplete system designed to produce emergence. The Sumerians were describing, 4,000 years ago, what complexity theorists, developmental psychologists, and neuroscientists studying self-organization are only beginning to articulate now, that the deepest structures of the human mind are not designed to execute a program. They are designed to write one. Now we arrive at something that connects this tablet to this moment, to right now, to the world you woke up in this morning. The eighth element of the tablet, and this is the final element before the closing passage, describes a condition that the scribe calls the time of false fullness. And the description is so precise that I want to read it slowly. The scribe records that there would come a period, not a single generation, but a sustained period, during which the vessels would fill their sealed layers with so much external information, so many external designations and external purposes, and external images of what they were supposed to be, that the pressure from the inside would become nearly inaudible, not because the original instructions had weakened, but because the noise on the outside had become too dense for the surface signal. The scribe calls this the covering of the covering. The original sealed layer, placed there by design, with intention, overlaid by a second layer, not designed, not intentional, built up over a lifetime of being told who you are by forces that never had access to your original name. The time of false fullness, when you are full of information and empty of knowing, when you are occupied with purpose and alienated from meaning, when you are connected to everything and recognized by nothing that matters. The scribe who wrote this tablet was describing the 21st century as clearly as any living journalist could describe it. The saturation, the performance, the exhaustion that does not come from working too hard, but from living too far from the thing that was sealed inside you before you arrived. And here is the modern parallel that should make the hair on your arms stand up. In 2018, a team of neuroscientists at the University of California published findings on what they called narrative identity suppression, the measurable reduction in a person's ability to access their own autobiographical self-concept when under sustained conditions of information overload and social performance pressure. In simple terms, when you are constantly performing for external audiences, when you are constantly processing external information at high volume, your brain measurably reduces its access to the deep structures of your own identity. You literally lose touch with who you are. Not metaphorically, neurologically. The study found this effect was strongest in people who had never experienced sustained periods of silence and inward attention. And the recovery, the return of self-concept clarity, was associated not with therapy or medication, but with what the researchers called retrieval conditions. Conditions that allow the internal signal to surface without competition. The Sumerians called it allowing the gate to open without pressure. The neuroscientists called it retrieval conditions. 4,000 years apart. Same mechanism. Same remedy. Now we come to the end of the tablet. And I have saved the most disturbing passage for last. Because the scribe, who wrote everything else in a tone of technical neutrality, changed his register at the close of the tablet. And the change is the thing that has divided every translator who has encountered it. The scribe ends the record of the original instructions. He ends the description of the sealed layer, the 7 pressures, and the intended convergence. And then he adds a passage that does not belong to the body of the text. It is separated from the rest by a symbol used in Sumerian texts to denote an addition made after the primary composition was complete. An afterthought, or a warning appended by someone who knew things that did not fit inside the official record. The passage says this: "Those who completed the design did not remain to observe the outcome. They left the vessels in the world and withdrew to a position from which they could not be petitioned." The tablet is clear on this: not hidden, not sleeping, withdrawn, finished with the construction, and absent from the consequences. And then the scribe writes something that translators have disputed for decades. Some read it as a statement of grief. Others read it as a statement of fact. And a few, a very few, read it as a warning embedded in the design itself. It reads, in Holscher's translation, "What was placed in you was placed there in full knowledge that most vessels would never open the gate." This was not a failure of the design. It was accounted for. The ones who do open it, who hear the original name, who follow the pressure to its source, who create the conclusion that was withheld, they are not the exceptions. According to the tablet, they are the purpose. The scribe who carved this tablet ended with a single line that translators have argued about for decades. Some believe it is a warning. Others believe it is a confirmation. Either way, it was written for whoever was alive when the sky returned to the position it held on the day they arrived. If this is the first video you have watched on the Lost Codex, there is a reason you found it today. Subscribe, because the next translation goes deeper than this one. And leave a comment below telling me which part of this tablet you think they tried hardest to erase. Because, based on what this tablet says about how humans were designed, your answer is not random. The ones who opened the gate were always the point.